Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the folks who sift through the noise, pull out what really matters, and hopefully give you the insights you need.
That's the goal.
And today we are diving straight into something happening, well, right now, basically. This very fragile, very quickly collapsing ceasefire between Israel and Iran.
Announced by former President Trump and then, well, it was unraveled almost immediately. It's quite a case study.
It really is. We've got news reports flying around. We've looked into some, academic thinking on war and peace economics, and we're even going to connect it, maybe surprisingly, to the Good Friday Agreement.
Right. Our mission really is to get past just the breaking news alerts. It's not just what happened when this supposed deal fell apart.
No.
We want to understand why. What does this specific messy event tell us about the deeper patterns? International conflict, how hard peace actually is, and what roles leadership and maybe more importantly institutions play in all this.
Getting to the bedrock, yeah. So let's unpack this chaos, because it unfolded incredibly fast. It starts June 24th, 2025.
Just hours ago, really.
Exactly. Former President Trump posts on Truth Social. Big announcement. He says, congratulations to everyone. It has been fully agreed by and between Israel and Iran that there will be a complete and total ceasefire.
And then he adds, at which point the war will be considered ended. Very definitive language.
Totally. He praised both sides, mentioned their stamina, courage, and intelligence, and he also kind of took credit, linking it to his earlier bunker buster strikes on Iran's nuclear sites.
Suggesting those strikes forced their hand, basically. So the picture he painted was one of success, a done deal.
But the reality on the ground, well, it clashed almost instantly, didn't it?
Violently. Just hours after Trump's post. And importantly, after Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel accepted the plan, the Israeli military detects a missile launch
From Iran
heading towards Israel. And it hit Beersheba. 4 people were killed.
Wow. So much for a ceasefire.
Exactly. It was just a shocking, immediate repudiation of everything Trump had just announced.
And Israel's reaction, I mean, you could imagine.
Swift. Furious. Defense Minister Israel Katz ordered the military to, respond forcefully with high-intensity strikes against regime targets in the heart of Tehran.
Right into Tehran. No messing around.
And Major General Zimmer of the IDF echoed that, vowing Israel would strike with force. So, yeah, this wasn't a slow crumble. It was an instant collapse.
Which then seemed to really frustrate President Trump himself.
Oh, absolutely. Visibly, publicly frustrated. He went back on Truth Social, talking directly to Israel this time.
What did he say?
Do not drop those bombs. If you do, it is a major violation. Bring your pilots home now.
Pretty direct command, or plea, really.
And he sounded genuinely angry. Yeah, his post suggested real frustration. He said both countries don't know what the F they're doing, and specifically called out Israel for dropping a load of bombs right after the deal was supposedly made.
Quite a turnaround from congratulations, everyone, just hours before.
A complete 180. And this is where the narrative's just completely fractured.
How so?
Well, while Trump's trying to pull things back from the brink, Iranian state media comes out and flatly denies firing any missile after the ceasefire was meant to begin.
Denied it completely.
Completely. Iran's Supreme National Security Council warned of a decisive and regretful response to any act of aggression. And their foreign minister, Said Abbas Araghchi, went further.
What did he say?
He stated there was no agreement to stop military operations at all, and he just reiterated Iran's view. Israel launched war on Iran, not the other way around.
So Iran is saying there wasn't even a deal to violate, while Trump is saying there was a deal, and Israel is violating it by retaliating to a violation Iran denies making.
Exactly. You see the problem. It's just utter confusion, total contradiction. Trump's triumphant announcement, Iran's flat denial, the tragic missile strike, it just fueled massive public skepticism.
Understandable.
And reports kept coming in, even after the ceasefire deadline. More missile alerts, flight delays, plus separate drone attacks on bases in Iraq hosting U.S. troops. No one claimed responsibility, but it adds to the chaos.
It really paints a picture of just how central media, and especially social media, has become in these crises.
Oh, absolutely. Platforms like Truth Social, like X, they're not just commentary anymore. They are the primary channels for huge announcements.
Like Trump declaring the ceasefire there.
Right. And then Iran's foreign minister using X for the counter-narrative almost instantly. Warnings, denials, declarations, it all happens there, live, often way ahead of traditional news.
And it's not just the speed, it's the framing, isn't it? How the narrative gets shaped in real time.
Precisely. Look at the blame game. Initial reports framed Iran's missile launch, if it happened post-ceasefire, as a shocking violation. Blame Iran.
Okay.
But then Trump weighs in, frustrated, blaming both sides, but especially Israel. Suddenly, the headlines shift to Trump unloads, and the framing changes.
So who the public blames can pivot based on a single tweet or post from a key figure.
Instantly. And that shapes public opinion, international pressure, everything. It makes finding the truth incredibly difficult for anyone watching.
Yeah, that public whiplash between triumph and collapse, between accusation and denial, it must breed a lot of cynicism.
Absolutely. Deep skepticism. How can you trust any announcement when it's contradicted so immediately and publicly by the other side, or even by the person who announced it just hours later? It really shows how fragile these things are in our hyper-connected world.
So, okay, we've seen the play-by-play of this immediate chaos, but like you said, this isn't just about one failed ceasefire. It tells us something deeper, right, about why conflict even happens.
Exactly. This pushes us into that political economy perspective. Why war? The basic kind of cold calculus is that actors choose conflict when they think the payoff, maybe better security down the line, maybe domestic political gains, maybe resources, outweighs the horrific costs.
And the costs are horrific. Human lives, destruction, economic ruin, we see that clearly.
We do. But leaders or regimes might calculate those costs differently or weigh potential benefits higher, especially if their own position is precarious.
But it's not always just about calculating leaders, is it? You mentioned institutions earlier.
Right. And this is crucial. Often, it's the underlying structure, weak political institutions that really sets the stage for conflict. It makes peace incredibly difficult to achieve or maintain.
What do you mean by weak institutions? Like, specifically?
Well, think about it. Good governance isn't just about having elections. It's about strong constitutional rules that limit power, protection for property rights, courts that actually work, accountability, transparency.
Things that let people resolve disputes without resorting to violence.
Precisely. If you don't have those reliable, peaceful ways to sort things out, then disagreements escalate. And leaders might not feel the full social cost of conflict. Their main goal might just become staying in power, whatever it takes.
Which leads to another big problem you hear about in these situations, the credible commitment issue.
Ah, yes. This is a huge barrier to peace. It's basically the trust problem, formalized.
Yeah.
Can each side credibly promise not to break the deal later, even if it becomes tempting? If one side thinks the other might gain an advantage by suddenly unpacking or cheating on the agreement,
then they won't trust the agreement in the first place. Or they'll be tempted to break it first.
Exactly. It creates this deep instability. You might get a ceasefire declared, like we saw here, but if there's no mechanism to make that commitment binding and trustworthy,
it falls apart.
It falls apart. That's why things like strong third-party guarantors or deep internal reforms that make breaking deals costly are often seen as necessary. Without them, promises are cheap.
So institutions matter, trust matters. What about just, well, money?
Yeah.
Economics factors.
Oh, absolutely. There's the whole greed versus grievance debate in conflict studies.
Greed versus grievance.
Yeah, basically asking, are conflicts driven more by deep-seated grievances, political exclusion, historical wrongs, or by economic opportunism? The greed side suggests that sometimes conflict itself creates economic opportunities.
How so?
While controlling resources, looting, black markets, even just getting paid as a soldier.
Yeah.
For some people, especially in areas with few other options, the conflict sector might seem like the best economic bet.
It's a pretty grim thought.
It is. But the flip side is also important. Research often shows that countries with more economic freedom, more open markets, secure property rights, they tend to have a lower chance of internal conflict.
Because people have more to lose, maybe. More opportunities in the peaceful economy.
That's part of the thinking, yes. When the legitimate economy offers real opportunities, the appeal of conflict diminishes.
Okay, so this rapid collapse between Israel and Iran highlights all these issues. Leadership declarations, instant media framing, the underlying problems of trust and commitment, maybe even economic drivers we don't see immediately.
Right. It's a microcosm of larger challenges.
It makes you wonder, how does peace ever take hold? Which brings us to the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. That actually worked eventually.
It did, and it offers some really valuable, though hard-won lessons, especially when you compare its success in 1998 to an earlier failed attempt in the 70s.
What made the difference?
A key concept is ripeness. Conditions had changed by the late 90s.
Ripeness, like the situation was ready.
Sort of, yeah. Both sides had reached a point, through exhaustion, through changing political landscapes, where a negotiated settlement started to look like a potential win, or at least better than the ongoing bloody stalemate. The status quo had become unbearable for enough people.
And they had that commitment problem too, right?
Yeah.
Especially around things like paramilitary groups giving up weapons.
Hugely. The issue of decommissioning arms was a massive hurdle. Initially, there was this demand for preconditions. Weapons had to be handed over before parties could even properly talk or join government.
Which sounds like a deadlock waiting to happen.
It often was. The breakthrough really was shifting from strict preconditions to conditions subsequent. Meaning the agreement comes first and the difficult actions, like decommissioning, happen afterwards, according to an agreed timeline and process.
That requires enormous trust, though. Or something else.
It requires incredible political will, but also, crucially, those credible third-party guarantors we talked about.
Okay.
People like Tony Blair, the British PM, and Bill Clinton, the U.S. president.
How do they help?
They didn't just host talks. They provided assurances. They essentially put their weight behind the deal, signaling they would help enforce it, hold both sides accountable after the agreement was signed. They helped bridge that trust gap.
So external players can be really critical in making commitments credible.
Sometimes essential, yes.
Yeah.
But it's also important not to just focus on the leaders at the table, whether it's Adams and Trimble in Northern Ireland or Trump trying to broker this deal.
Why not? Agency matters, doesn't it?
It does. Individual choices are vital. But the Good Friday Agreement also shows how leaders often act within broader currents. The IRA's campaign of violence was yielding diminishing returns. Unionists felt increasingly isolated and saw self-governance as maybe a better bet than direct rule from London.
So the leaders made the moves, but the ground beneath them had already shifted, making those moves possible, maybe even necessary.
Exactly. It's that interplay between individual leadership and those larger political, economic, even social forces. Peace often emerges when those align.
Okay, so bringing this all back together, this flare-up between Israel and Iran, even though it's international and the Good Friday Agreement was internal, it seems to highlight some universal truths.
I think so. You see the role of political will, Trump trying to force a deal. You see the fragility of it when underlying trust and institutions aren't there. You see the power of narratives spun through media. You see how quickly things can escalate when commitments aren't seen as credible.
It really seems like the headlines focus on the handshake, the declaration, the leader.
Right, the dramatic moment.
But the real lasting stability seems to depend on that less glamorous stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The institutions, the guarantees, the economic conditions, the slow building of trust, the foundations.
That's often the case. Quick breakthroughs can happen, but making them stick requires that deeper, often slower, work on the fundamentals. Without that bedrock of credible commitments and solid institutions, declarations of peace can be washed away very quickly.
So here's something for you, the listener, to think about. Looking at how fast this recent ceasefire seemed to evaporate, and thinking about the lessons from something like the Good Friday Agreement.
What kind of structures, what kind of mechanisms, maybe institutional reforms within countries, maybe new international approaches, do you think are most needed to make sure that when peace is declared, it actually has a chance to hold?
What's the key ingredient for making these fragile moments last? Something to mull over.